Whew, it's the day after an election day here in the state of Minnesota, and we're going to talk about that election, but we're going to talk about it here at home and then across the country, because if you read the tea leaves or you're into that, a lot of things happen. To do that, for that conversation, my friend Abu Amara, a political analyst with us. He's coming to us live from D.C., and we will just jump right in. Abu, good to see you. Let's talk about local. Were you surprised by any of the results in Minneapolis-St. Paul?
Well, I think the city of St. Paul election sent shockwaves across, the Democratic Party in Minnesota. Melvin Carter is a known commodity, very charismatic, very engaged and outgoing. To see him lose that election was something of a surprise to many of us. But if you talk to folks actually doing the work on the ground and the folks who were in the know, they tell you that they saw this coming.
They saw Kali Her with the kind of campaign she was running. So that's the St. Paul side. And then let's talk specifically about a couple of things. I'm going to lay out the scenario. So the majority of school referendums passed, even in a troubling economy. People said, yes, I'll pay more money for my districts. This is in small towns in Minnesota and in big cities. Some progressive candidates still won on the city council. And then Jacob Frey, a more moderate, not the Democratic Socialist candidate, re-won a term for mayor. So what does that mean?
Yeah, well, I think it's a mixed bag, but I think it's really two things. One is that politics that's closest to the people are a politics that people supported. So, for example, those school board races, when folks can see the impact that their dollars are going to make, they're more than willing in Minnesota to be able to support those things, as opposed to kind of sending money off to Washington and not really getting much in return. So that's kind of the local impact. But if you look across the country, I think the statement is really much the Democratic Party is back. Whether it be, the Democratic Socialists of Mamdani in New York, or whether it be the moderates in Virginia or in New Jersey, or the California ballot initiative around redistricting. It really showed an activated Democratic base, and the coalition was much broader than it was in the 2024 election when Democrats lost. And so I think that is a signal, maybe, of a coalition that could go into the 2026 midterms and take back a House or take back Congress.
Yeah, very clearly, Democratic Party woke up a little more energized today than it had in a very, very long time. And you point out some key differences. Mamdani is one thing in New York City. That's really about his vision in that race. But then you talked about Virginia and New Jersey. Those were moderate, centrist Democratic women who won by large margins. And you kind of see that throughout the country. There's no real through line that all Democrats went socialist. That's not the case at all. So it kind of makes the case that there's room within this party, the Democratic Party, to have different ideologies depending on the race.
Absolutely. And I think that the through point with all those candidates was speak to what matters in your community, in your state, in your city. So often we try to kind of paint a brush of the Democratic Party as a monolith. You should believe all things all the same way, all the same time. And politics is all about what your community needs. And so I think, if anything, the Democratic Party should take away from this is, be a big tent. Do what is popular in your community. Galvanize your people around issues that they care about. And if you do that, you'll be rewarded at the ballot box, regardless of where you are.
Another thing that stood out to me, Abu, is the numbers in turnout. St. Paul had huge numbers. Minneapolis had huge numbers, record-setting numbers. Nationwide, turnout was huge. Why did so many people come out to vote last night?
Yeah, my entire theory of this is the first opportunity for the Democratic base, or even independents who are concerned, to get out and vote in response to Donald Trump, right? And so obviously he was inaugurated earlier this year. Folks have been frustrated. They've been taken to the streets, protesting, whether it be No Kings or other things. But this is the first opportunity that people have actually been able to check a box on a ballot and make their voice heard. And so I think that's why you're seeing some of the historic numbers.
And that's what I was kind of taking away from it. Just for folks watching, take the Democrat part out of it. To me, I saw historic turnout and the results of this election as a lot of people seeking change. Even in St. Paul, Mayor Melvin Carter was won his elections the first two terms by wide margins. He was defeated by Khalil Herr, also a Democrat, similar in ideology, but that signals that people wanted change.
Absolutely. There's a Democratic story, but there's a much broader story around folks feeling like things need to change. Two examples, one of which is in Virginia. You saw a massive group of independent leaning voters. And those are voters that the Democratic Party had lost just last year in the presidential election. That independent voting base turned out double digits in favor of the Democratic candidate. So this was not purely a red or a blue issue. It was a galvanizing around what is happening in our country and folks making their voices heard.
And about that thing that may be motivating voters, you know, and I know it was said by James Carville decades ago, it's the economy, stupid. The turnout was everywhere. Do you think that the economy, cost of living, anxiousness about it motivated people to go out yesterday?
There's no question. I think the economy was number one. And I think the national environment was number two. You know, the presidency and also in Congress have talked about the economy. I think they correctly diagnosed the problem. But the reality is there haven't been solutions that people have felt in their day-to-day lives. You know, they're going to the grocery store, they're seeing prices go up, they're getting killed with inflation, they're seeing increased child care costs. And so speaking to affordability, right? Again, I think that's the common through point of when New York and Mamdani speaking to the very left version of affordability, or the moderates talking about bringing down prices. I think that is a through point that regardless of your party, that's something that's impacting millions of Americans, and they want to see action taken on it, and they want to see it now.
And that's really interesting, too, because President Trump really ran on that this second time around when he was elected a year ago today, I think, for his second term. And it is that lesson, like I said, and quoting James Carville, of like, when it gets down to it, yes, there are big issues, identity issues, social issues. But when the economy is tricky, that's when people want to hear your solutions, especially when we're in a shutdown on day 36, when you have workers not being paid, questions about, you know, will your airplane run on time, things like that.
Absolutely. The economy is going to be number one. And remember, this time last year, the entire debate was around the economy, and the arguments that were being made were we can solve these problems quickly. So folks had an expectation that, you know, inflation would come down quickly, costs would come down quickly, and that hasn't happened. And so you're seeing voters frustrated, rightly so, that there haven't been enough actions taken, and now they're still feeling the effects of last year, and they're ready for change.
And that's why I thought it was interesting you brought up independents or who voted yesterday in any which way, whether it be California, Virginia, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Colorado, Minnesota. They could be people of any sort, and there were some flips. And so are we seeing kind of a go back to people voting for who is speaking to them, not just I'm a straight party ticket?
Absolutely, you're seeing that. I think it's not so much far left or far right. It's ballot box and couch. And what I mean by that is there's so many voters who checked out of the process in years before. You're seeing those voters step back up into the political process, turning out to vote. I think New York City is a perfect example of that, where you had literally tens of thousands of new voters who had not participated before, because they felt like the campaigns around affordability were speaking to them. And so I think that whether you're a Republican or Democrat, when you think about your coalition, it's not just the folks who historically turn out and maybe show up to, you know, party events and rubber chicken dinners of those things. It's really everyday people who are impacted by the issues of the day, and how are those folks galvanized to participate in the process. And so going into 2026, you know, Republicans and Democrats have to think deeply about how do we not just speak to partisans, but how do we activate a new generation of Americans who are either apathetic and sitting out, or are coming into their political enlightenment at the age of 18 or 19 or 20 and want to be a part of the process, but they want to feel like something matters, like there's actually going to be a change. Parties have to worry about that, and I think you'll see some changes moving into 2026.
And that kind of goes towards your point of like speaking to the voters where they are.
Absolutely. I think, you know, the bygone era of, you know, you just kind of assume what person votes based on how they look or where they're from, I think those days are over. I think you have to truly speak to the issues and be willing to hold yourself accountable to the vision you're selling. And then if you're getting into office, to implement those things, because voters are losing patience with simple rhetoric. I don't think that's going to last much longer in this new era.
Right, because it's no good to be on a team if you don't feel like your life is changing or getting any better. It's like, we're done with teams. I'm going to elect you to a job. If you don't do it, I'm going to take it back.
Exactly. I think you're seeing a level of urgency and accountability with the electorate that I think is a bit more impatient in a good way than in years past.
Abu Amara, we always appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about politics. Thanks for being on Breaking the News Plus.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That's all for us on this election breakdown. We'll see you next time. Good night.